Thank you for that worship time. You have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 28. Genesis chapter 28 as we continue our study on the life of Jacob. From a rascal to a righteous man. A journey of this man's individual walk and life before God. And how God continuously pursues him to transform him into a righteous man. Changing his name eventually from Jacob to Israel. The one who's going to be the father of all of those boys who will become the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. So far, we've seen in his life, we saw about his birth. He was born the second son, a set of twins, Esau being the oldest, his older brother, the hairy red one, who loved to be the outdoorsman, who loved to be the hunter, the favored son of his father Isaac. And then we find Jacob, the second one who came forth out of the womb, holding on to his brother's heel, being given the name Jacob because he is one who supplants or one who tricks and grabs one by the heel, an old deceiver or trickster. We saw that both of these guys live down to their names. For whenever we see that they have grown, Jacob one day finds the occasion, the opportunity that he would be able to get the birthright from his brother Esau, who had it rightfully because he was the oldest. Finding Esau in one of those weak moments when he came in from hunting and he was hungry, it says famished. And he says, give me some of that red stuff, that red stew that you have. And Jacob says, no, I won't give it to you, but I'll let you have it if you'll sell me your birthright. And remember what Esau said, having great disrespect for the things of God and the spiritual position of the birthright, said, I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me? Sure, I'll sell it. So he gives him a bowl of soup or stew, and he eats of that, swears and sells him his birthright, and Esau goes his way, but Jacob has obtained the birthright, and Esau has very little concern about it. The next situation we find out, though, is when Isaac decides that he wants to give the blessing. And Isaac should have known that Esau no longer should have received the blessing, because the rule is that one who has the birthright also receive the blessing. And he should have known that Esau had sold his birthright. By prophecy, it had already been foretold that Jacob would be the stronger, the one who would receive the blessing. But Isaac decides he knows best, and he tells Esau to go and get some game and to prepare it, make a savory dish, bring it to me, and I will bless you. But Rebekah hears about that, and she gets ahead of that, and she tells Jacob, I need you to go get two kids out of the herd and bring them here, and I'll prepare a meal, and I'll send you in there, and you pretend to be Esau, and you let your father bless you. And that's exactly what happened. She took the hide and put it on his hands and his neck to feel like the rough skin of Esau, prepared the savory dish, put on Esau's clothes so that he would smell like Esau, and sends Jacob into his father, who can't see very well at that time, and deceives his father to make him think that he's Esau, outright lying to him, telling him, yes, I am Esau, yes, I am your son, and he receives that blessing. Now, the blessing was already his because he had the birthright, but he and Rebekah got out of walk with God and decided they'd help God out. And I've told you before and tell you again, don't help God out. He's perfectly capable of fulfilling his plan, his way. And when you try to help him out, it's just like in Jacob's situation, you usually mess things up. He got the blessing, he got the birthright, but he also had to deceive his dad. He tricked his brother, and he caused his brother to hate him. His brother so hates him that it's going to have enmity between him and their lineage and their genealogies all the days of their existence. And that didn't have to be. It's because Esau, Jacob, all of them were not doing God's way, following God's plan, but their own plan. Well, we saw at the close of last week that Jacob had gotten that blessing. If you read in chapter 27, the end of that, you find as soon as Jacob finishes getting the blessing, Esau brings in, prepares a savory dish, comes for his father, said, Father, I have prepared that dish for you, now give me a blessing. His father said, what do you mean? Who was that just came in? I've already given my blessing away. And they both realized that Jacob had deceived Isaac and had received the blessing. And Esau says, can't you bless me? Can't you give me a blessing? He says, no, I can't do that. You will be a servant to your brother. and your people will serve his people. And Esau gets so angry within his spirit and his heart that he actually says this, when the days of the mourning of my father's death are over, I shall kill my brother. But remember, if you were here last week, remember the interesting thing about that? Isaac said, come and let me bless you, Esau, before I die. How many more years did he live? 43. 43 more years he lived before he ever died. So Esau was going to have to wait a while for the mourning time, and Isaac was getting ahead in order to do it his way and his timing. But Esau was angry. And whenever Rebekah heard that Esau said he was going to kill Jacob, she tells Isaac and tells Jacob, you need to leave here. And Isaac agrees and says, you need to go, Jacob, to your uncle's house, Uncle Laban's house. That's Rebekah's brother. You need to go to his house and you need to find someone to marry out of his family. You need to travel there. Well, it's not just to find a bride for Jacob, it's to get him out of the way so that he doesn't get killed by Esau. And so the next thing you find is Jacob is departing, going to his uncle Laban's. I want to begin reading in verse number 10 of Genesis 28. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba, where they lived, and went towards Haran. And he came to a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head, and he lay in that place. Okay, the first thing, let's talk about Jacob's departure. His departure. It says that he leaves Beersheba and he's going to travel to Haran. Haran is located in what would be called Syria today. Now, if you got one of those Bibles that has maps in the back of it, you might want to look at that. Beersheba is actually in southern Judah. It would be a good distance south of Jerusalem on the very southern part. He's going to have to leave Beersheba. He's going to have to travel up all the way through Judah, all the way through the land that is promised, all the way up to Syria. Now, on the Mediterranean Sea, that's at the lower part of this curve. You have to go all the way to that side and go up to the north and to the east a little bit, and there's Haran, which is in the nation of Syria. That's where he's going to have to travel to. That's 450 miles. You need to put that down. 450 miles he's got to travel from his home to his uncle's home. That's not by Learjet. It is not by bus. It's by walking or on a camel or on a donkey. How long do you think it takes to travel 450 miles? Some of that fairly rugged terrain. Now here's the interesting thing about his departure. Of the two boys, Jacob would be the least likely to take that adventure. You remember how they were different, don't you? Esau was the outdoorsman. He was the hunter. He was the adventurer. He liked to take on those challenges. He liked to live in the world. He liked to get his food from killing the game. That was just his life. If Esau had been told, you're going to have to travel 450 miles, you're going to have to live on the land, you're going to have to make the best you can, you're going to have to go to new areas where you've never been before, that really wouldn't have been a whole lot to Esau because that was his nature. Have you ever met people like that who have that nature? I mean, I see people all the time who they'll go and they'll hike here and hike there and live there among the wildlife. I have no interest in that at all. I mean, I'm here to tell you, I'm a whole lot more Jacob than Esau when it comes to that. Man, let's go out and let's camp. Let's go out and get a motel. Let's go make it rugged. Let's go make it easy. Jacob would be the least likely of those boys to take on this journey. Remember, he didn't like outdoors. He liked the peaceful things. He didn't like living out under the stars. He liked living in the tents. Go read it. He does. He enjoys those kind of things. He feels comfortable in that. If you put him outside of that, he's very uncomfortable. But do you know what? Sometimes God has to move us out of our comfort zone to speak to us. You need to write that down. Sometimes God has to put you outside of your comfort zone so He can get your attention, so He can speak to you. Now, I don't know where your comfort zone is, and I don't know what you like, and I don't know where you feel comfortable. But God can quickly and very deliberately, in just a matter of moments, change the very direction of your life from being a place of comfort to a place of discomfort. A place where I wouldn't choose to be to where I have to be. A place where it's not the norm for me, but it's going to be the new norm for me. And it's a place that God puts us there so we can hear from God. And so when Jacob departs from his home, when he departs from the familiar, he departs from his family, he departs from that tent where he's comfortable. He's about to travel 450 miles to a place that he's never seen before, to people he's never met before, not even counting the journey he's got to go through to get there. And I'll assure you this, he was uncomfortable. That's not exactly what he would have chosen, but it's what's been chosen for him and where he has to be. And in that place, in that situation, he discovers some important things. I don't know where you are today. I don't know where you'll be tomorrow. But I can assure you sometimes in life's journey, we come and find our places in places we would not choose. Places that we don't feel comfortable. But places that obviously God has ordained for us. And maybe it's so we can hear Him. Maybe it's so we can discover some things about Him we would have never known in our comfort zone. That's what happened to Jacob. He had to depart from the familiar to discover what? Well, he discovers a lot. Look what happens to him. In verse 11, he came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set, and he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he had a dream. Let me ask y'all, do y'all dream? Do y'all dream? Some people dream and some people don't. I could not imagine not having dreams. I dream all the time. I'm telling you what, dreams are real to me. My wife's in danger sometimes because my dreams are so real to me. People say, I just never dream. I couldn't imagine not dreaming. I dream. Now, for those of you who think that that's really good because you don't dream, I want you to know something, that sometimes God speaks through dreams. I'm not saying anything, I just think about that. God speaks through dreams. God speaks through this man's dream. He's sitting there, and I can imagine why he dreamed. If I put a stone under my head, no telling what I would dream if I was trying to sleep on that. And he had a dream, and this is what he dreamed. A ladder or a stairway was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants shall also be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. What a dream. What a word. What was his dream? Well, the first thing, he sees this ladder, Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder, or the stairway. And that ladder or that stairway, it reached up into heaven and it reached down to the earth. And on that stairway, at the top of that, where heaven was, that's where God existed. That's where God lived. That's where God resides. And on the earth where it was where man lived, and specifically it's where Jacob was. And on this ladder, or on this stairway between God and man, there were angels, the ministers of God, the messengers of God, those who carry out the work of God, those who are helping to fulfill the plan of God. Those messengers, angels, are going up and down that ladder, carrying things up to God, to heaven, and sending things from God down to the earth. What an amazing thing they're seeing, that he's seeing. What all that has to do with, you could read volumes of interpretation, but the simple form is this. And Jesus talked about it whenever he was in Matthew 18, and he talked about the angels that take care of the children, that they're angels behold the face of God. The angels are ministering servants who are carrying out the will of God, and they're busy doing the things that are the will in heaven to get the will of God accomplished in this earth. And somehow, in some way, God knew that this man in a very uncomfortable place in his life needed to be able to see something nobody else could see, seeing the stairway or the ladder that extends into heaven. That would get your attention. It would get mine. But that's not all. He saw those things, but he heard other things. He heard from God. Listen to what he heard from God. It says there, and God said to him, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. And he begins to make promises and statements to him. Here they are in order. The first thing he says, this is the land on which you are lying. I will give it to you and to your descendants. He has nothing. Basically, Jacob has left his homeland. He's left with very little possessions, and he's headed off to a place he doesn't know. And God speaks to this man and says, the land where you're lying, I'm going to give this land to you and to your descendants. That's not all. Verse 14. Your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and they'll spread out to the west and the east and the north. You're going to have many descendants. Now remember, God had already promised Abraham that he would have more descendants than he could number the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. Now Abraham only had, as a child of promise, Isaac. And Isaac only has two boys, Esau and Jacob. So who is it going to be where this expansion of this nation and the descendants that he promised to Abraham, where is that going to take place? It's going to take place in Jacob and through Jacob. And this guy who isn't married yet and who's on his way to his uncle's house to try to find him a bride, he's been told by God, your descendants are going to multiply. You are going to have descendants going to spread all over this earth. There are going to be so many you cannot count them. And I'm here to tell you, God's going to be faithful to that. He ends up having 12 sons who become the 12 patriarchs of their tribes. And they multiply, and they multiply, and they multiply. But God tells him, I'm going to extend, and I'm going to make your descendants like the dust of the earth. Not only that, he says, and through your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Through your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now hold on here. In Genesis chapter 28, the passage we just read just pointed to Jesus. You understand that? When he says to him, through your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed, it's pointing to the fact that Jesus is going to come through that lineage. Just like he told Abraham, through your seed, all the nations, all the world will be blessed. He's affirming right here that Jacob is going to be a part of the blessing of God whereby the Messiah is going to come. What a great word. He doesn't understand that, but what a great word. And also remember this guy's heart's not right yet. He's not dedicated to God yet. He's still a Jacob. He's still an old deceiver. He's still an old trickster. Everything he has is because he deceived somebody, tricked somebody, or stole something. But God's come to him and he said, listen, I am God, and I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to multiply your descendants, and I'm going to bless all the earth through you and your descendants. That's not all, though. That's what else he says. Verse 15. And behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I don't know about you, but if I'd have been where he was, that would have been a word of comfort to me. If I'm going to a place I do not know and my comfort zone is not to be in this arena anyway, I'd like for God to tell me, I am with you and I will keep you wherever you go and I'll bring you back to this place. He says, I'll protect you. I'm going to watch over you. I'm going to be your guide. I'm going to be your life. I'm going to be with you. That's not all, though. Look at the end of verse 15. And I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. I'm not going to leave you until I have done what I have promised. Now write this down. This is worth you coming if you don't get another thing out. Wake somebody up, okay? Slap somebody over there. Wake them up a minute because they need to hear this, all right? This is something you need to hear. The promises of God that God makes is God's obligation to fulfill that which He promises. Did you get that? The promise God makes, it's God's obligation to fulfill that which He promises. Sometimes I think we get confused about that. We think, well, God promised it to me, now I got to get busy doing it. That's not the way it works. When God promises you a promise, it's God's obligation to fulfill that promise. That's what He said. Listen, and I will not leave you until I have done. Did He say you or I? He said I. That's God. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. God is the one who does what He promises. And He says this, I'm not going to leave you. Wait a minute, God, do you know who this guy is? Have you seen his resume? Have you looked in on his conversations? Have you watched his deception? God, why are you making such a promise to a rascal like him? Because God knows He's going to make that rascal into a righteous man. And I'm here to tell you, God's plan for you and me, listen to this, please. God's plans for you and me are eternal plans. God didn't come up with a plan for your life when you got right. Did y'all hear that? Y'all kind of act like a little slow today. Are y'all slow? Ball games wear y'all out yesterday? God doesn't come up with a plan B. Well, did you know what old Joe got saved? We got to come up with a plan for his life. I can't believe it. Joe actually got saved. Somebody come up with a plan. That's not the way God works. God already has a plan for your life. He already knows exactly what that plan is. And that plan preceded you getting right. And the plan and the promises that He had for Jacob, they preceded Jacob being right. He had a plan for his life. And He says this, I'm not letting you go. I'm not leaving you alone. I'm not stopping until everything I have promised you and planned for you is going to be done. That's a promise. Now, some of you are thinking in regard to that, well, all those possessions that God wants to give him and all those things, that's what God's talking about. No, the biggest thing God's talking about, you're going to find out in his life, is God says, I'm not going to let you go till I get everything done. And the number one thing is changing you. I'm not just going to bless you with things. I'm not letting you go till I change you. Till your heart is made right, I'm not letting you go. Till everything I promised you is going to be fulfilled. My responsibility, not yours. Now here's a little side note. You put a little asterisk right there. When God has a plan and God's going to fulfill that plan, you have a choice and you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice about whether God's going to do it or not. God's going to do it. You just have a choice of whether you want it to be easy or not. It's a whole lot easier just to give in. Say, Lord, have your will. Have your way in my life. Have your will. Have your way in my life. That is a whole lot easier than it is for God to accomplish what He wants to accomplish, but to have to drag you along the way till you figure it out. But God's not going to give up. And I don't care how much you dig your heels in, you're not going to be able to overcome Him. Now, I know that farming may not teach you some things, but it teaches you a lot of things about the will of God. In our experience years ago, we raised registered beef cattle, and so we had calves that we would show. And my daughter she would show calves. So what you would do in order to show a calf, you had to halter break a calf. That means you put a halter on them. And I mean, when you first put a halter on them, they don't know what that is, and they don't walk necessarily beside you. First thing is you let them out of the chute, and you try to find the closest pole you can to tie them to before they drag you all over the pasture. Now, some of those calves were the easiest things in the world to break. You just they'd learn to walk with you, and they'd walk to the feed, and they'd walk to the water, and they'd do. And some of them didn't walk at all. They would dig their heels in, and they would stop. They're called pressure animals. You try to push, they try to pull. You try to pull, they try to push. And I'm here to tell you, you just would pull and jerk and everything that you wanted to, you could hardly get some of them to go. Move them this way or move them that way. But now that didn't stop anything. That didn't stop anything at all. There's a way to break that. For instance, when they think that they have it mastered, you just tie them to a tractor. And there's one thing about it. A tractor's stronger than they are. So when they dig their heels in, you just drag them all over the pasture till they figure out it's a whole lot easier to walk. Or there's another way. Whether you know this or not, this will help you all. I know you really need this information. If you're trying to break one, the best way to do it is to hook them to a donkey. Just tie them to a donkey. Best way to break them in the world. Whenever that donkey wants to go somewhere, if that calf doesn't want to go, he just kicks them right in the nose. Boy, before long, they realize. They realize wherever that donkey goes, there's not a bit of slack and not a tightness in rope at all. Wherever that donkey wants to go, they go. Just so they don't get kicked. They learn how to give to that rope, whatever. See, what I'm simply saying is, I'm not comparing God to a tractor or a donkey. But what I am saying is this, it's a whole lot easier when you just learn to walk and submit to that. But God is big enough that He's really not worried about how much you dig your heels in, because He's bigger than you are. And His plan for you is going to be accomplished not because of who you are, but because of who He is. That's why I said you don't really have a choice about whether God's will is going to be done, but you do have a choice whether or not it's easy or not. And just be smart. Be smart. Say, Lord, I want to do your will. What did He say? He said this, I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. That's what He's discovered about all these things and promises. Listen to what he says his discovery is in verse 16. Listen. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. That's a great discovery. I hope you've made that discovery in your own life. The Lord is here, and I did not know it. The Lord is here, and I did not know it. Did you know the Lord is everywhere, but He knows that the Lord is there? Do you know what he was saying? He said this, man, I tell you, for my whole life, I've thought that God, that my grandfather worshiped and my father worshiped, I thought God was down there at Beersheba. I thought God had to do with Him. I thought God had to do with that place. But I have moved from there. I am traveling. I am no longer in my homeland. I'm no longer at the place where my father met with God. And I found out something. God who was down there is God up here. That God's here just like He was down there. I found out God is real and God is here. And I did not know it. I'll tell you something. If you'll discover that's a great discovery in your life. That God is here. Even though you didn't know it. Well, after he makes this discovery, listen to his decisions. He makes these decisions about his life and what he's going to do. Listen to these decisions. Now remember, this guy's not saved. This guy's not righteous right now. He hadn't been transformed by God at this point. But here's his decisions. Verse 17. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? First decision, he gave reverence to God. He had a fear for God. Man, this is awesome. This is an unbelievable place. This is a place where God the angels of God are going up and down. He had a fear. He decided to give a fear and reverence for God. Look at the next thing, verse 17. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. This is the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. This is where God is speaking to me. What else goes on? In verse 18. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took a stone that had been under his head, and he set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on the top of it. In other words, he made a memorial place where he had met with God. Not only did he make a memorial place, he is spiritual enough to know to pour oil on it. He anointed it, sanctified it as a holy place before God. Here's a guy who doesn't have a relationship with God, who's not righteous, and in his way, he's still a Jacob, but he learns to fear God, and he learns to give God a place, and he learns to anoint that place. That's not all. Look what else happens. Verse 19, and he called the name of that place Bethel. You'll hear about that all through the Bible. However, previously the name of the city had been Luz. He called it Bethel because Bethel means the house of God. And here's another decision he makes, verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. In other words, he makes a vow to God. God, if you'll do these things, then I'll do this. I'm vowing to God. That's not all. Look at verse 22. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. I'll make a house for God. That's not all. Listen to this one. You're talking about spiritual. Listen to this. And all that thou didst give me, I will surely give a tenth to thee. I'll tithe. Now, I'm telling you what, that's a spiritual experience. If somebody makes a commitment to tithe, I'm telling you what, that's a spiritual experience. Here's a lost man who's committing to tithe. He's not even saved. He's committing to tithe. And he says this, a tithe means this, that what I give, when I give a tenth, that tenth symbolizes that all that I have is God's. And through that action of me giving that tenth, I recognize that all I have is God's. And I'm going to do that. Listen to what he said. Whatever you give me, God, I'm going to give you a tenth. Now, here's something you need to put down in your notes. Throughout the Bible, here included, when somebody committed to tithe, even if their heart wasn't right, God blessed them. His heart wasn't right, but God blessed him. Whenever he leaves there, he's going to make more money, have more possessions than you could ever imagine. In 20 years, he goes from carrying a bag in his hand to driving stuff back that's far more than you could ever imagine in this world. God multiplies that. Why? Because he made a commitment to tithe. Wow. He made a lot of decisions. A lot of decisions, a lot of vows, a lot of commitments. He had decisions because he had encountered God. But here's the deficiency. There's a deficiency in all that he says. All that stuff sounds pretty good. But here's the deficiency. God makes no deals. God doesn't make deals. And his commitment to God was a deal. If God, look what he said, if God will do what he said, if thou wilt be with me, I thought God promised he'd be with him. Did he? If you'll be with me and you'll keep me on this journey, I thought God promised that he'd keep him on a journey. Didn't he? And if you'll give me food to eat and garments to wear, I thought God said he would take care of him along the way. Did he? And I returned to my father's house in safety. I thought God said he was going to be with him until he returned to his father's house. Did he say that? This means yes. It means no. He said, if God, you will do all those things, then here it is. Then the Lord will be my God. God makes no deals. God, if you'll really show up, and God, if you'll really do what you said you'll do, then God, I'll be on your team. I bet the Lord was excited about that, don't you know? About as excited as He is when you say you're going to be on His team. The Lord makes no deals. You know what the Lord wants? The Lord wants faith, not deals. And if He had been a man of faith, this is what He would have said. God, because you have promised me, because you have said it, because this is going to happen, because of that, I make you my God. I make you my Lord right now. But He didn't do that. And that's why His vows, as serious as they are, as sincere I'm surely in His heart they were, it was deficient because God makes no deals. God responds to faith. He responds to faith. So, even though in His departure He's made a lot of great discoveries and He made some important seeming decisions, He's still not a righteous man. He could have become a righteous man right then if He'd have responded by faith instead of making a deal with God. But He doesn't become a righteous man. You're going to see He's still Jacob. When He goes over to Laban's house, he's Jacob. Of course, Laban is a good teacher too. Kind of runs in that family. Rebekah's a pretty good deceiver, and Laban is Rebekah's brother, and he's a pretty good deceiver. I mean, it runs pretty heavily in that family. Aren't you glad it's only in their family? Oh me, move on. But he goes over there and he has a whole lot of things, and God fulfills His promise and God blesses him and everything. But the one thing that whenever he leaves that place to come back that's not happened, he's still not a righteous man. He's not going to be a righteous man until God literally takes him and grabs him. The angel of God is going to grab him and going to wrestle with him, and they're going to have a night where they're going to find out, he's going to find out whether or not he's going to be God's or not. But until that time, he's not changed. Even though God is revealing Himself, and he has the opportunity of discovering so many things about God. And to know that God is surely in this place, and I didn't even know it. I hope you realize the story of Jacob is not just the story of Jacob, it's the story of our lives as well. We're all Jacobs. God's got a plan for our life just like He did Jacob's. God's going to fulfill that plan in our lives just like He will with Jacob. But the situation with us is, are we wanting to make deals with God? Or we want to have faith in Almighty God? We want to be recipients of the promises of God? Or do we want to have a relationship with that God? What do we want? What do we desire? What's the need of our heart? The need of our heart is transformation, regeneration, change. A change. And that's what God wants to bring about in our life. Has He done that in your life? Have you given your heart to Christ? Have you not made a deal but just said, I trust in the Lord God? I trust in Him. I want Him to be my Savior. I want Him to be my Lord. I want to have a relationship with God on His terms, not my terms. Have you done that? You need to. What about you, child of God? The will of God being fulfilled in your life? It will be. You may get drug around a while, but that's okay. God can drag you around. It's just a whole lot better whenever you say, okay. All right, you'll find out it's a whole lot easier walking than dragging. And that the place He has you to go is the best place for you. It's the best place for you. Even though we resist it. God has that place for you. Those little old show calves, whenever you took them out of the pasture, they didn't want to come. But you know, whenever you broke them, they had their own stall. They had their own watering trough, their own stall. They had special feed. They actually got to sit under fans and misters that kept them cool all during the summer heat. I'm telling you what, they had it made. And I've really liked to wonder if cows communicate with each other. Because if they did, I really think that those show calves looked outside of their stalls sometimes and laughed. They laughed at all those calves that didn't get chosen. Said, aha, Y'all thought we had it bad. But look what we got now. Sometimes we're about like those show calves. We don't realize what we're getting. But if we just give in, the blessings are beyond what we could ever imagine. Special place just for us. He treats us a lot better than we treat show calves. You experiencing those blessings? I hope you will. I hope you do.